They say justice is blind, but here in America, justice is often in the eye of the beholder, and for some, justice is simply denied. In this series, we'll take a look at justice from different angles, here on Perspective Justice.
All right, what is good, everybody? We are tapped into the Crucial Convo podcast Perspective Justice show, and this is an awesome one. This is the first one. You tune in with your host, your gracious host, Kojo, and Yaya in the
That's
building.
right.
So we're going to be talking about some of the things that are going on from a perspective of what justice is supposed to look like. So, well, let's talk about Carmelo Anthony. So, this is such an interesting case because we start off with two kids, 17 years old, right? Now,
Mm-hmm.
they were at the track meet. Um, everybody's heard the story unless you're living under a rock. So, Austin Metcalf tells him to move from the tent. He tells him to move, and of course, Carmelo Anthony, I believe he said um, he wasn't going to move, and then I guess Metcalf put his hands on him and either pushed him or touched him, and he was like, "Touch me and see what happens." And I think Metcalf touched him, and then from there he said, "Punch." Then Carmelo Anthony said, "Punch me, and you'll see what happens." Something to that effect. Either he said, whatever it was either touch me, and then from touch me, it escalated to punch me and see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I understand, obviously he pulled out the knife and stabbed him. Now, I'm going to start off here and then let me know what you think. I think that this case was a situation where Carmelo Anthony overreacted. That's what I think.
I think so. I think so. I think that oh god, this is indicative of such a larger problem with today's youth and just such a lack of impulse control and emotion regulation. And I mean, there's so many reasons behind that we could, talk about that forever. But I think that it's just this was such a senseless death and such a senseless case. Nobody needed to lose their life. Nobody needed to go to jail because what? You're asking someone to move?
Right.
You know, that it's sad to me because a 17-year-old boy is now dead. And,
Right.
and over what? You have another 17-year-old boy who's facing like life in prison.
Facing life.
And for what? Because you I don't know, your ego was bruised, or now you're all amped up, and how dare this person tell me to move, or how dare this person put their hands on me,
Yeah.
and you're dealing with the male ego, and now it's like your two rams butting heads to see who's the alpha male here, and now one person is dead, other person's life is basically ruined,
Yeah.
because he's always going to be responsible for this death that's going to follow him. I guess from my perspective on this, if you're looking at it from a perspective of justice, right?
Mhm. Yeah. What do you think? What do you think should happen? What do you think he should be charged with? I mean, let's start from there. Like, what do you think is the appropriate charge for this crime?
I think the appropriate charge, because a person has died, would
Well,
be.
let me ask you this first before you even say that. Do you
Mhm.
think that this is self-defense? Why don't we start there? Do you think it was self-defense based on what we know so far?
That's a little bit difficult because it's a yes and no answer, right? I think it was a self defense. If what he's saying is true, hey, this guy put his hands on you, got in your face, whatever like that, and now you're responding. Okay, that in itself, yes, would be self defense. However, if you are egging this person on and saying, okay, well, now do this, well, now do that and see what happens, you are now becoming the antagonist, right? So now you're instigating. So now this is more of a mutual combat versus a self-defense.
Right.
Typically with self-defense, you are looking to escape serious bodily injury or
Imminent
death,
danger.
right?
Right.
Imminent danger, imminent threat. And that is typically one of the legal standards for a self-defense case. You have no other options but to use deadly force.
Right.
Now, you had other options, okay? He wasn't armed.
Right.
Obviously. He's pushing or throwing fists, right? You can see he's not armed. Okay. Pulling out a knife, I feel, is a little unreasonable against someone's fists. 2, subtract me. Y'all can run, right? I mean, that to me is, if you're trying to escape an imminent threat and you have the opportunity to flee, the first thing, run. Now, we're in Texas, right? Stand your ground. So you don't necessarily have the legal obligation to flee.
I don't want to stop you, but that right there. So stand your ground, right? So that's the interesting thing. Like, I wonder, do you think that that's going to be the core part of the defense when they go in? Are they going to stand your ground? Like,
I mean, potentially. I think it really kind of depends on the facts of the case and if it would be beneficial for him as a defendant to use that. I mean, depending on the other facts of the case, that could either help him or hurt him, you know?
Okay.
Because I think that a person of average intelligence is going to say, well, if you were so afraid for your life, why didn't you just run? Track me.
And
why didn't you just move?
That's going to be the difficulty.
Right. That is going to be a difficulty, because how do you answer that question? Right. Typically, self-defense is, I'm afraid for my life. I had no other option but to use deadly force. However, in this case, based on what's been put out there, you had plenty of other options. You went way too far on a situation that didn't need to go that far.
Well, let's look. I want to look at the Texas stand your ground law.
The stand your ground law kicks in if you are not provoking the altercation, if you are lawfully where you are supposed to be, and you are not otherwise engaged in criminal activity. There is no duty to retreat. In some states, there is a duty to retreat, but not in Texas, so long as those three things are present. In fact, a jury is actually going to be instructed they are not to consider whether you retreated. Retreating, removing yourself from the fight. You're allowed to stand your ground and to defend yourself. You don't have to wait to be attacked. You don't have to try to run away from the attack in Texas. The same rules that apply to you will apply to a third person. If you are allowed to defend yourself with either force or deadly force, given the situation, you are also allowed to defend a third person in that situation. As an old-time prosecutor, former DA in Harris County used to say, if you got a right to kill him, you got a right to kill him dead, dead, dead. If you are lawfully defending yourself, you are allowed to lawfully defend yourself until that is no longer a threat.
This was an impulse thing. Now, when he stabbed Austin Metcalf and ran, one of the first things he said to the officer, he asked, is he okay? And he asked, could this be considered self-defense? He said that to the officer. So to me, the narrative of, because some people have been saying, well, you know what, why would he bring a knife to a track meet? And he must have wanted to do something, and this was premeditated. And I totally don't.
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that at all. Plenty of people carry knives for personal protection all the time.
Yes.
You have that knife with you everywhere you go.
100%.
Especially living here in Texas, a lot of people carry firearms.
Right.
Everywhere they go. So if you happen to use your firearm when you're out somewhere, that's not indicative of premeditation, because you carry that firearm with you everywhere. Same way when you carry your knife or your mace. You carry it everywhere if you use it one time. So that in itself is not, to me not a big issue.
Right.
If
people carry knives all the time.
Correct.
Hunting
So
knives and
that
stuff like that.
I think is easily explained away. Now, the when you mention the proportionality, if I'm a prosecutor, right? One of the things that I would bring up is their size difference. I don't know exactly what their size difference was, right? I would be talking about their physical capabilities, their stature. Okay, I mean, did you think that he was bigger than you? Were you scared of him? You scared of him? You thought he was bigger than you? You thought maybe you could not run him? I mean, you'd be asking all these questions because to determine a reasonable belief. You know what I mean? And
Now
that's going to be,
you're saying if you're the prosecutor or you're the defense.
if
Because
I was a prosecutor and trying to try this case, I would be going at the fact that, okay, well, Carmelo, were you afraid of him? You know, and see, and that goes to intent, and that also goes to the ego part of it, because as a prosecutor, you're going to be trying to prove that, hey, your ego was hurt and you overreacted to try to prove what a big man
well,
you are.
he's gonna automatically say that he was scared of him. So I think if you're prosecuting, you're probably gonna ask him. You probably might, you might put it a different way, but they're going to say, well, I don't know what they're going to say, but I'm assuming they're going to go the route of self-defense. And if they go with
Oh,
self-defense,
absolutely,
they're going to have
absolutely,
to
that's what
try
they're
to,
saying.
what I mean? They're going to have to be like, yo, I was scared, and
There,
they're going to play up his stature.
right. Well, was Carmelo Anthony bigger than? Um,
From what I understand, no. I mean, when you look at him, Austin Metcalf was definitely he looked bigger. I don't know
okay.
about height, but as
Hmm.
far as like girth, size, he
Okay.
definitely looked like a bigger kid than Carmelo Anthony. You know what I'm saying? Um,
Okay.
but to your whole point, just going back to the impulse thing. In high school, kids get into
Okay.
fights, and to your point, you said something earlier about the kids of today. There was a time where kids would fight. Things did escalate sometimes, but they never escalated that fast. I never saw anything or heard of any
Hmm.
high school fight where someone was stabbed to death so quickly. Usually there would
Hmm.
be some type of fight. Maybe somebody got jumped, or it was a serious fight that escalated to the point where you had a knife. You know what I'm saying? And
Hmm.
somebody used a weapon. But usually off the rip, people wasn't
Right.
just using a weapon off of being. I don't even know if Austin Metcalf actually punched him. I don't know if
Right.
he
Right.
may have pushed him and grabbed his bag or whatever
Hmm.
it was. So it didn't even turn into a fight, from what I understand.
Hmm.
It was just he used a knife, and I think that when I first heard the story, so it's interesting. When it first happened, I was like, "Oh, this kid is going to jail. It's just a question of how long."
Hmm.
Um, I never thought it was first degree murder, which he's supposed to be charged with, or capital
Yeah.
murder, right? I
Yeah.
think it's I thought it would I think it's probably second degree or manslaughter that makes more sense. I mean, what do you think about that?
I feel like he's going to go to jail. I feel like this is more of a manslaughter, um, third degree murder, perhaps.
Third degree, you think?
It's a question of intent, right?
Yeah,
I don't think that there was an intent to kill. I think
right.
there was an intent to commit, serious bodily harm, right? There was a recklessness aspect of it, right? You pulling out a knife on somebody who's not armed, right? That's reckless endangerment, because clearly, if you have a knife and they don't, you have somewhat of an advantage over them, right?
Right.
There was an intent to hurt. I don't think that there was an intent to kill, but I think his actions were reckless, and they resulted in someone's death, which is maybe like a, I don't know, a second degree
I think he's looking at.
manslaughter.
I think it's second degree murder. So second
I
degree.
wouldn't necessarily say it's a second degree murder. I don't think it's that. I don't think it rises to that level of seriousness.
Well,
I
let's
would
let's
maybe
let's
say like
talk
more of a
about the
second degree manslaughter.
You know what? I tend to agree with you too. Like I think I think it'll probably end up being manslaughter if I had to guess. From the beginning, that was my thing too. But
Yeah.
I had to go back and look at the definition of second degree murder. So, second degree murder generally refers to the intentional killing that lacks premeditation, meaning
Correct.
the predator did not plan the murder in advance. It's a more serious crime than manslaughter, but less severe than first degree murder. So, yeah,
Correct.
I agree with you. I think,
And see, and that's where the intent piece
right,
is. That's
right,
why I don't think that it's a second degree murder. I
yeah,
think it's more of a manslaughter case. I think that would have been the appropriate charge. I don't think that going right off with a first degree murder charge is appropriate, or even a second degree murder is appropriate in this case. Um, but a lot of times they overcharge because they
you plead
realize
down.
that they either will plead down, or at least the jury would have an option of a lesser included offense,
Right,
versus where if you don't charge them with multiple things and it's either say, well, it's either second degree or nothing, they may say, well, this doesn't rise to the level of second degree murder, so now we're only left with acquittal.
right,
And you know
right,
what I mean?
right.
So
That's a good point. That's a great point.
I really think that like a second degree manslaughter is the appropriate. I don't think there was an intent to kill. I just don't, at least from the facts that have been brought out so far, I don't think there was an intent to kill, but I think there was an overreaction, perhaps a fear response or an ego driven response that I think his actions were disproportionate to what was actually happening. And I think that to take it even a step further, I think these days that we have to teach our children it's okay to get your ass whooped, here and there. At least you live.
I'm glad
Back
you said that. I'm
in
glad you
our
said that.
day,
Well,
sometimes you just got your ass kicked, but
well,
you
you
live
know
to
what?
see another day.
Let's touch on that for a quick minute too, because here's the thing. I totally agree. That's kind of one of the first things I thought about in this case was the fact that you have to learn to defend yourself
Hmm.
appropriately. That's what I
Correct.
think too. Like, yeah, maybe he might not have got his ass whooped, but he didn't try to
Right.
fight. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But you can't pull out the knife. My first reaction to this case or this story, I was like, yeah, he's going to jail because
Hmm.
he escalated too fast. So
Hmm.
kids in high school, they're gonna have fights. I have a son, right? You have a son. The
Hmm.
goal is you want to make sure they can protect themselves, right? You want to
Right.
make sure they can defend themselves, and your daughter as well, right? Your daughter,
Hmm.
son, no matter what kind of whatever sex of kid you have, you want your
Hmm.
kids to defend themselves. But
Correct.
the thing is that you don't want most parents don't want their kids to get that ass whooped. They want their
Hmm.
kids to win. It's just natural.
Right.
But or at minimum, they want their kids to defend themselves. They don't want a
Right.
defenseless child. However, you're right. When you start thinking about your kids getting into possible skirmishes, you like, well, I don't want you to kill the other person because you're gonna go to
Hmm.
jail for the rest of your life. Um,
Right.
and
Right.
you know what I mean. So just as much as and I don't know if this is a conversation that Carmelo Anthony's family or father and mother had with him, but I'd be just as scared as my kid getting their ass whooped. I'm just as scared of that as to them killing someone too.
Correct. Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
You have you getting your ass whooped. Is maybe a bruise to your ego, but you will survive it. You will go on, and people will forget about it, and your
Right.
true friends will still be your true friends, and people will be talking about something else the next week.
Right.
I don't
Right.
think there needs to be this fear of people talking about me and worrying about what people think, because people's opinions are not going to. Nobody was ever bonded out of jail by opinions.
Facts.
Okay,
Facts.
nobody's future was ever at stake in the courtroom based on the opinions of their classmates.
Right.
That should be the least of your worries. And I think that as parents, we do need to teach our children how to defend themselves appropriately and proportionately.
Proportionally, yes. Proportionally,
And
yes.
that is such a big deal because we have
Let me let me ask your opinion on this, because when you
yeah.
brought up that point, I think it's indicative of the. I'm not blaming his parents. I'm just saying
Mm-hmm.
I think it's indicative of the culture of society now. Because the
Mm-hmm.
culture of
Uh-huh.
society, if you look at situations like, just to veer off a little bit, when you look at like road rage, there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of road rage now where people don't even argue. People are shooting. You know what
Absolutely.
I'm saying? Like they're going,
Absolutely.
people are going
Immediately.
all the way there.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm
But
saying?
we're in a society now that escalates so quickly, and that's
Super
almost the
quick.
expectation is like, you did this, I'm gonna one up you, or
Yes.
I'm gonna go 10 times as hard
Right.
as you
Yeah.
to prove to you that I'm bigger and badder than you.
Right.
And it just becomes almost, well, literally a fight to the death.
Yeah.
To for what? To prove a
Like
point?
who gonna kill who
To prove
first?
I'm badass? Exactly. And then
That's
we
what
have
I think. You know what I mean? Like that's what I thought when I heard this case, because I'm like, wow,
Mhm.
it went. That was like the beginning of it. I mean, and again, I'm not excusing Austin Metcalf. The other
Mhm.
side of the coin is also, you have to teach your kids to keep their hands to themselves too, because
Correct.
now I'm not Austin Metcalf doesn't deserve to die, but
Absolutely.
one of the lessons that can be learned on the flip side of the coin, looking at that side, as far as the family of, the deceased,
Hmm.
you got to teach your kids to keep their hands to themselves, because you
Correct.
don't need to because at the same time, the question could be, look, okay, Carmelo Anthony shouldn't be under the tent. You feel like, yo, this is my team. You shouldn't be here. Well, this ain't the coolest thing to do, but you could go get a teacher or somebody to tell them to get this, to ask the student to leave. But when you start going to put your hands on the
Hmm.
student, if he didn't put his hands on him, he'd be alive today.
Well, and here's the other part of that too is we need to teach our children how to talk to people. And I think that wait these days with with such an angry society, people don't even know how to talk to each other with respect anymore. I think perhaps if Austin had spoken to him differently, maybe the whole situation would have gone differently. Maybe instead of, hey, you ain't, and I don't know that this is how it went or what was said. This is more of a general thing.
Mhm.
We see these young kids, and first thing they're doing is hands raised, all up in the air, ready to tell somebody what they not supposed to do and what they ain't gonna do, and they all of this, as opposed to, hey, you know what, this area is for our team. This is just our area. It'd be better if you weren't under here. Just even
I don't know if there's
speaking
a
to
nice
people
way to
with,
tell him to get the hell out of here.
you know what, but you got to find a way though. In
Huh?
order to avoid, you got to find a way. In order to avoid situations from unnecessarily escalating, how
That's
about
true.
find a way to tell somebody, you know, something with respect and dignity? There's nothing wrong with that. I feel like too often children are encouraged to say stuff in a way that's rude and disrespectful, and then they're praised for that because we call that being tough. We call that being, standing up for yourself. You can still stand up for yourself with dignity and respect. We don't always have to go the route of disrespect every time you want to communicate something to
Well, but
somebody.
you know what? But that's true. It all depends on your intention when you're talking to people, right? So if you're trying to talk to somebody, and that's a good point. I'm not. I don't. I think that point is real. But I think that the intent is really to be like, yo, you need to get out of here. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know if there's a nice way to say that. I think that you gotta realize, to your point, you gotta be respectful, but you also have to be aware of what is confrontational and what's not confrontational.
And I,
So,
and I
you know what I
totally
mean?
agree with that. And I
So
think,
I think
and that
that,
comes down to how you say stuff too.
well, I agree with that. I agree with that. I just think that the premise of telling somebody they need to move technically it's raining. At the end of the day, you're human beings under a tent. So from that perspective, what reason? Just because you're on opposite teams, you can't sit under a tent while it's raining? I mean, really, at the end of the day, I mean, if you're bothered by it that much, to me, this is my take. If you bother by it that much, yeah, I agree with you. Maybe there's a nicer way to say it to him and wait on the response. And maybe if you're disrespected, you get disrespectful back. Or if it bothers you that much, go ask a teacher or something.
What and I think that also too we need to teach our children to properly assess the situation. Because was it really that serious? If it's raining outside and a member of an opposing team or whatever is under the same umbrella, is that really hurting you? Is it really that big a deal? You know what I mean?
Well, here's the next part of it for me. And this is where it's getting crazy because obviously it's turned into something very racial, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the racial aspect of this case, I'll be honest with you. I'm going to start by saying, had had he stabbed a black boy, another
Mm-hmm.
black male, we
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't be talking about the case at all, more than likely. I'll say that. You know what I'm
Probably
saying?
not. I think we probably would have maybe heard about, a death at a track meet, but I don't think that it would have gained this level of national attention.
Hell no. Hell no. And quite honestly, I don't think race has anything to do with the case. However, it's now turned into a situation where um now there were some uh lies on both sides. There were some lies saying that the family started a GoFundMe and raised
Mhm.
$350,000 and was buying a new car and all this stuff. So that's all been
Not.
debunked.
Hmm.
But here's the thing. I think where the racial aspect started to come into play is that when they started saying self-defense, then a lot of people started to attribute these other cases that had white and black scenarios in it and say, well, what about George Zimmerman? What about Kyle Rittenhouse? What about this and this and that? And I'm like, I don't know if that's the right thing to do in this case because, you know,
Those cases were way more extreme. I don't think that that's a fair comparison. Race could have played a role, but maybe not as largely as people are making it out to be. We don't
mm,
know what these two boys' individual feelings were about race. We
right.
don't know what they were thinking with regard to race at the time this is happening. It could
Yeah,
have been, well, who does this white boy think he is? Why, think he's talking to me? Type of feeling, or it could have been,
that could have been the vibes.
who does this N word think he is over here with us? We don't know. We don't know if they thought that. We don't know if they might not have had any sort of racial feelings at all. You
Right.
know, but I think that played much less of a role for them than it is for everybody else after the fact.
Right.
And so people are making it more about race because look where you are. I mean, you're in the South. I mean, unfortunately,
Well, shit,
black.
you in America. You in
Yeah,
America.
right. You're in
And
America. I mean,
in America,
it's just
it ain't gonna miss a play. It ain't gonna miss an opportunity to
to
make something about
to drag
race. You know what
exactly,
I mean?
exactly.
So
Especially in this current climate. I mean, it is
yeah,
what it is. It is what it
no, that's
is.
true. That's true.
But
I think people are using it. People are taking
mhm,
this case and making it a narrative to
mhm,
fit how they feel. So
mhm,
um, so
absolutely.
he goes to jail initially. The bond is $1 million.
Hmm.
So the um the judge, she decided to go ahead and reduce his bond from 1 million to a quarter mil, and she
Hmm.
reduced it. So that was controversial initially,
Hmm.
and that became a big thing too. So once she
Which
did
I don't
that,
even understand that because that happens all the time, and I think this is another part where they're making it putting a racial component to it, to where you see young white men who've been charged with serious crimes get their bonds reduced all the time. And we've seen on the flip side where a lot of African American males who were charged with similar crimes did not get their bond reduced. You know, so in this case where you had this African American male charged with a serious crime getting his bond reduced, they're so used to them not getting their bond reduced. Now people are upset, like, well, why is he getting off? Whereas when this happens so often with, you know, their white counterparts, they've almost come to expect it. So, you know, again, they're making that also about race.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. They're so
And
used
I
to
don't even think that was racially motivated. I think the judge probably just made a judgment call.
so they're so used to it not happening for the young black men that when
The
it
young
did
black man.
happen, interesting. Here's my thing. I feel that there is race stoking on both sides. Now, first talking about the Metcalfs, excuse me, not the Metcalf, but the Anthony's, the family representative who did the press conference with them. There was a lot of racial stuff that I feel like he was stoking. I think where this goes wrong with all the racial stuff to put on top of this case, you got to get back to the meat and potatoes of it at the end of the day. You know what I'm saying? So, like you said, all the racial stuff is really being put on after the fact by people, whether it be the Anthony's family representative, whether it be now they have this Protect White America group. Jack Lang, he was one of the January 6th people who were prosecuted. He has this Protect White Americans thing, and they call Austin Metcalf's father live to ask him, you know, to join their movement, or to just be a representative, or can they use him as a representative of their movement? So
Americans, fight. Hey, Jeff, it's Jake Lang here.
Yes, sir. What can I do for you?
Jeff, first of all, my entire heart rests in your hands. I would be in my position, not even as somebody even knew your son, but somebody that it shares the same understanding. I grew up as a 17-year-old young white man too, and I grew up in fear of my life around black people because they were killing and robbing people around me all the time. And I don't understand, as I was a father, you could sit idly by and not condemn the culture that killed your son. There is an epidemic problem in this country, and your voice could be one of the loudest voices in this country, but you've chosen to recoil out of fear and continue the suppression. Why will you not stand with me and with the rest of the people? We're not calling for racial divide. We're not calling for hatred. We're saying 350,000 attacks on white people by black people a year in this country is wrong. Why can't you stand that and say with that? Maybe you can. Would you be willing to stand by me in a press conference or in an individual interview and talk about this issue that is larger than Austin at this point? God rest the beautiful young man's soul that would have been one of our strongest voices if he was still alive today.
Are you done?
Yes, I am, sir.
Okay, my turn to speak. You are part of the problem, my friend. You're trying to create more race divide than bridging the gap. I do not condone anything you do. You do not have any.
That's called white guilt.
No, let it talk. Let me finish. I give you your time. You take my son's face off your website. I am not associated with you.
You're creating more Austin Metcalfs with your weakness, sir. You are creating more Austin Metcalfs with your weakness.
So I mean that is wild work right there when you look at that. But you know that's what people want. People want to make this thing about them, you know, and
that's really, it's sad and disgusting that he would try to use this man's tragedy to further his movement. And I applaud Mr. Metcalf for standing strong and admonishing him to take his son's picture off their website. I don't stand with you. I don't condone nothing you do. You part of the effing problem. I absolutely agree with that. And my heart really goes out to Mr. Metcalf and their entire family, because this was a really senseless tragedy.
yeah,
And it saddens me that a 17-year-old boy had to lose his life at a track meet over
Yeah.
something extraordinarily petty.
Right.
And for Mr. Anthony, and this is not about race, for me, this is not about race. This is about two young men who it sounds like were being young men
Right.
and struggling with a very common teenage problem of impulse control,
Yeah.
of emotion regulation, the testosterone and the ego. A lot of young men struggle with that, and I think that it's just a sad scenario on both sides because you have yet another young African American male about to be part of the system and have a really horrible mistake that he made, a horrible decision that
Yeah.
he made follow him for the rest of his life.
Right.
And so there are no winners on any side, whether he gets convicted or not. There are no winners anywhere.
And I totally agree. The thing about this case is that it really isn't much different than anything that happens every day, right?
Correct.
So, like I said, I mean, again, I agree. This rate, I mean, this case is not about race to me because in
Mm-hmm.
the black community, these things happen all the time. Somebody is talking stuff about somebody else. People pull out a gun. It happens at Chicago, for example, top crime city for 13 years straight. 13
Mm-hmm.
years straight. Anybody who studied and looked at Chicago, we're the I say weird because we're from Chicago, but we don't live there anymore.
Right. Right.
But it still feel like weird. But Chicago's been the top murder city for 13 years straight, and a lot of the crimes obviously is in our community. And this happens every day where somebody shot somebody, stabbed somebody. Most of the time, it's shot somebody
Mm-hmm.
off of whatever it is. It's usually impulse. It might be some type of disagreement, whatever it is. And it happens all the time. And you know what? The person goes to jail. So
Mm-hmm.
this wasn't as serious or this wasn't premeditated. It wasn't like some gang rivalry or nothing like that, right? It doesn't fit into that category. But this is a situation where, like you said, two young men got into some type of disagreement and one of them killed the other person. You know what I'm saying? Not on
Mm-hmm.
purpose, but just took it from 0 to 100 too quick.
And,
And you're
and I
right, it
think that
is sad.
you mentioned something earlier about this being indicative of a larger problem within our culture. And
Right.
I don't mean black culture, but I
Yeah.
mean youth culture at
Hmm.
this point, because this is something that extends to all races among present day youth,
For sure.
with the lack of the impulse control, the social skills that are lacking. They don't know how to talk to each other. They don't
Facts.
know how to problem solve. They don't know how to, negotiate or debate or to really even control their
They don't even
impulses.
know
They
how to
don't.
fight, most
They
of
don't
them.
know how to fight. They don't know how to do anything, but they know how to escalate. It's like everybody knows how to talk shit, but nobody knows how to de-escalate. And
That's true.
it's like that's not being taught anymore. De-escalation is almost being viewed as some sort of weakness,
Right.
or you being a punk, or
Right.
or everybody knows how to be a bully, but nobody knows how to be the bigger person.
This case has become something different than what it actually is. It's now morphing into something else. It's become something totally different. And the racial aspect of it is so now the Carmelo Anthony's family, they had to move. They
Mm-hmm.
recently moved because of so many threats. They're getting
Right.
Austin
And
Metcalf's obituary in the mail, and people are threatening them and all this stuff. And it's turned into that. Now, that may have happened anyway, just for the fact you do have people who are racist. Whatever it is, it's going to happen. But
mhm.
on the flip side, you do have. Here's the thing. Let me say this, and this is one of the points I wanted to bring up. I think it gets dangerous when we just turn into we go to our sides because he's black, I'm black. I'm automatically going to say, well, you know what? it was probably self-defense. And what about these other cases that happened? These other cases where, you know what I mean? And I think it's important, if we want justice, right? We have to be able to detangle or differentiate one case from the other. So I can't go and look at George Zimmerman or go look at other police shootings or George Floyd. They all are not the same thing.
They are all different
And they have
in and of
nothing to do with each
themselves.
other.
Correct.
This case
I agree.
has nothing to do with racial injustice. It has nothing to
Right.
do with it at all. And I bring it up because everything that you're saying is what we should be talking about. Two kids, how to de-escalate something so someone doesn't end up dead
Right.
over something so small. But we can't have that conversation because it's all turning into a black and white thing.
Right. Right.
You
You're right.
know,
You are
and I'll say
absolutely
this
right.
last little point. The thing that makes me sad on the black side for people who are looking at this, I fully support him. I believe it was self-defense. It's sad because no one looks at the black on black crimes at all. You know, and I believe, I don't know for sure, but I believe had he stabbed another black boy, no one would be talking about it. No one would honestly,
Not at this level.
I don't believe anybody would even have an issue with him being charged with capital murder. I don't think anybody would have said, you know what I mean? Like, think about it. Think about if he had gotten to it with another black boy, they got into some type of thing and he stabbed the black boy in the chest and died, and the boy died. Do you think that any now minus anybody white, because anybody white wouldn't have even been, it wouldn't have been on their radar. But as far as the black community, I don't think anybody would have been like, oh, why is he had self? I don't think anyone cared. They would have said it's another violent crime where they needed to focus on everything you just said. Man, that was something where these boys got into something and it escalated too quickly, and one of them shouldn't have ended up dead, and the other shouldn't be going to jail.
I think you are making a really, really good point, because so many times when we have seen these different rallies about crime in the hood and what we need to do and how we need to have unity and all this other stuff, they bring up these points when it's two young black boys or two young black girls, or whatever the situation is, about how we need to start. Parents need to do this, and we need to do this in the community, and we need to teach our children this, and blah blah blah, right? Which all is true. It's all valid. I take nothing away from that. But I think you're right that the racial component is robbing people of their vision and seeing that this is the same thing. Just because the defendant and the victim were different races, does not mean that it's automatically self-defense, or that it's automatically murder, or that it's automatically anything. The it's We still need to teach our children how to de-escalate, conflict resolution, anger management, social skills. And I think that this case is a cautionary tale about the lack of all of those things in today's youth.
Yeah.
And I think that's the bigger story here that's getting lost in all of
Right.
this.
That's definitely the biggest story that's getting lost here, and it's now taken over the whole situation. So we're gonna see what happens with this case. It's gonna be interesting when it goes to trial, because
Yeah, we'll see how
it's,
this all plays out.
we'll
I
see.
mean,
We're gonna see what's up. You know, this has been a great episode of Perspective Justice. Um,
absolutely.
you guys let us know what you think in the comments. If you think what you think, because everybody has an opinion about this case. And is race a part of this? Is it not a part of this? Also, what do you think will happen at trial? You know what I'm saying?
And
So,
are we teaching our kids? What are we teaching our kids? What should we teaching our kids about conflict resolution and impulse control and de-escalation? I mean, is there enough of that?
yeah,
Is there enough of
yeah,
that? And what
that's
do you
it.
guys think that
That's really
parents?
it.
What do you think the conversation needs to be? What can we
Yeah.
take away from this?
What do we take? Yeah, 100%. What do we take away from it? So, well, until next time, tap in, all comments, are welcomed, good and bad, and we out of here.